Welcome to Daily Life Connection. Thanks for joining me again today as we look at Luke 15 and how it reveals the Father's heart. Today I want to look at a concept that we find here when the Father is talking to the elder brother. When we see the elder brother saying, I have served you and I have obeyed you, but you haven't released blessings to me because of that. And one of the things that we find here is, like, we look at the younger brother and we realize that he was living in what we call the flesh. He was living in human desires. He was doing whatever he felt he wanted to do, self-indulgent living. And we can certainly see that as being of the flesh, as we call it. But the reality is, living by trying to be self-righteous, trying to become righteous through our commitment, our behavior, our getting everything right, is just as much of the flesh as sinful living is, as living outside. I would take us to a couple of verses we find in Philippians chapter 3. I love this verse in the New Living Translation. It says, we rely on what Christ Jesus has done for us, and we put no confidence in human effort. We put no confidence in human effort. And then in Galatians chapter 5, if you are trying to make yourselves right with God by keeping the law, you have been cut off from Christ. You have fallen away from God's grace. Very clear and powerful truths here that living, trying to become, well, in Galatians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul puts it this way, here in chapter 3 rather, after starting your new lives in the Spirit, why are you now trying to become perfect by your own human effort or by the flesh? In other words, Paul is saying, trying to become right in God's eyes, trying to maintain our righteousness or become more holy or righteous through our own human effort is just as much a work of the flesh as is going out and doing sinful things, that we would call it. The problem with this concept that we become more righteous if we behave better, that we become more holy and more godlike if we conform to a higher moral standard and get our beliefs all right. The problem with that is it generates such arrogance and pride. It's just, well, it goes back, doesn't it, to the problem in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve saying, okay, we're going to know what the moral code is and we'll keep it, which they didn't. And of course, Israel at Mount Sinai, and Moses says, here's the law of God. And they said, oh, good, tell us what it is, we'll keep it. But they didn't. And it was that way all through the Old Testament. We see it, people constantly saying, we're going to keep this moral code of God, and that will make us right in His sight. And God is saying nobody ever became righteous that way. Nobody ever succeeded at that. But when we think we can, or that that's what He's expecting of us, it becomes an arrogance and a source of pride, doesn't it? We actually do. We say, well, you know what, I'm doing better than others are. We get into that comparison kind of thing as the older brother going like, I'm certainly not as sinful as my younger brother is. And that whole thing just becomes so obnoxious. It becomes such a stench to God. It becomes such a barrier, isn't it? A barrier. You see, this older brother had because of his self-righteous human efforts, he had put a barrier up between he and his father, and he'd put a barrier up between he and his brother. He had isolated himself. He had withdrawn himself he had made it impossible for there to be fellowship and relationship with his father and his brother because of that attitude. So, it comes back again to this whole concept of, do we understand that trying to become righteous, trying to become holy, trying to become qualified in God's sight for blessings and for His favor and for a relationship with Him through our human efforts, through our commitment and recommitment and rededication, no matter how many times we do that, it does not bring us into a closer relationship, ever. It just doesn't work. And it's just as much of the flesh as is sinful living. Something to think about today as we say, Lord, help us never to become enamored with the idea of becoming more holy or more righteous by our adherence to moral codes and creeds and beliefs. Those are not the things that bring us into relationship with the Father. or qualify us in his sight at all, ever. And so it's a major warning that Jesus is giving here to his followers and to the church, to us. Don't go down that path. Don't go down that path. Let's think about it. We'll talk again tomorrow.